Good evening and welcome. I'm not even sure that I need this microphone. It's a great room. If you've never been to the Boone Electric Cooperative new facility, this is just wonderful for us. And we appreciate them letting us set up camp here for a couple of these sessions. My name is Linda Smith. I am a member of the League of Women Voters and a member of a new organization called When She Votes. And there are three other sponsors with us here tonight: the Reynolds Journalism Institute, the Daniel Boone Regional Library, and then Race Onward here in town. So 5 organizations are bringing you this entire series, tonight being session 1. And it came from a conversation that had to do with this being a big election year. We have 2 more to go, 1 down in Boone County, 2 more to go. And where are people getting their resources? I think I heard Dr. Kiley once tell us that, did you ask your students where they were getting their information, her journalism students? And I believe that the answer was TikTok. Yeah. So Seth and Kathy both say they don't get their information from TikTok, but we're going to talk about where people get their information and how we can be good consumers of information, especially that coming out of campaigns. And hopefully that you will leave enlightened as to some of your social media sources and maybe a few other sources as well. I will say that this is one of 3 sessions as a part of Before You Vote. We're going to do this every 2 weeks. So we'll be back here 2 weeks from tonight, and that will be Seth back with you again, talking about good social media habits. So we'll continue to roll out social media. And then the final 2 weeks later from that evening, we're going to focus on artificial intelligence and what you should expect from this. Oh, okay. Oh, Artie, well, welcome. And what you should expect of the use of as it infiltrates our lives. And I know I'm getting messages from Google all the time about incorporating our artificial intelligence, and I'm probably not the person to ask anything about artificial intelligence. But so our 2 speakers tonight, let me just give you a brief background because we're so excited. They just jumped on this with us when we went to visit with them and said, yeah, we'd love to be involved. And Seth laid the groundwork with some work that he had done before, an actual course that he had offered, and things just came together, and we're so appreciative. Seth is a public services librarian at the Daniel Boone Regional Library, and has worked closely with digital and media literacy efforts at the library for the past 6 years. And I did mention his daughters keep trying to lure him into the world of TikTok, and he keeps saying no. So but we've had some interesting conversations of how his daughters are getting their information, and an adult perspective on using TikTok for your information. And then Professor Kiley, yeah, I'll just read a few things about Kathy. The Lees Hill Chair in Free Press Studies, named for Lee Hills, who had a long and varied newspaper career. Kathy has spent some time in as a reporter with some major publications, including the Washington Post, and we got to hear some really great stories from Kathy on her life as a reporter. I did find on Google that she recently won the 2024 Mel Carnahan Public Service Award. And this is bestowed by the Carnahan Policy Institute in honor of a former Missouri governor. And I'm new to Missouri, but I understand that that governor died in a plane crash. recognizes those who have made an impact in the state through a commitment to public service. So a very talented duo up here for you for our first session tonight. So enjoy, and we're here until 8 o'clock, and I'm guessing that we'll have time for questions. And yeah, all right, thank you.
Okay, so you've met, you've gotten to know a little bit about myself and Seth. Seth is from the Daniel Boone Regional Library, and he and I have worked together before on media literacy. I work for the Missouri School of Journalism, and I'm a longtime reporter. So we are both, I would say, information professionals, and we're here to talk to you a little bit about how to navigate this brave new information world, which even for professionals can be a challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Linda, for that great introduction. I want to mention there are a few Zoom housekeeping notes. This is also on Zoom. So just at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if you hover or tap, you should see, among other things, a hand icon and a chat bubble icon. And those are two ways to ask questions during the presentation. Everyone's microphones are muted now, but once the presentation gets going, you're welcome to raise your hand if you'd like me to unmute you, or Lauren will be actually working with the Zoom. Sorry, Lauren Williams, one of our great public services librarians. No, actually, she's one of the community managers. I'm a public services librarian. Sorry. You can also ask a question or make a comment using the chat. And we'll keep an eye on the chat as well and read those questions and comments as we can address them. So grab a piece of paper and a pen and jot down some ideas during this presentation. So this program is building on our previous series of webinars related to media literacy, and will concentrate on digital information management and overload. This is especially important. This is especially important as we approach an election at a time when we know that bad actors, both at home and abroad, are trying to exploit the openness of our information ecosystem to influence our elections. But I must say that this is a completely nonpartisan effort, and I don't want to tell you how to vote. We want to tell you how to get the information you need so you will vote with enthusiasm. And remember, there's more than one office to fill this fall. Sometimes the offices that are furthest down on the ballot have the most impact on our lives. There will also be amendments, third-party candidates, and other items on the ballot for consideration. Not voting is giving up on democracy, and it's really exactly what the bad actors want you to do. As information professionals, we think the best answer to information overload is not cynicism, but healthy skepticism, not censorship, but education. And like our media literacy course, we want to emphasize that we aren't trying to tell you which devices to use or where to get your media. We feel like technology can be a force for good. So let's hope so, because a lot of people are using it. The statistics are overwhelming. 48% of adults under 30 now get their news via social media, according to Pew Research Center study released in 2020. This is a staggering statistic. It's only increased in the past few years with the pandemic. I think everyone started reverting to social media and digital world to get a lot of their media and interaction. It's another addition to this saturated news cycle, this 24/7 news cycle that really started in the 1980s with channels like CNN. So I personally use Google News on my phone. I have an Android phone, and I get lots of Google News updates. It's exclusively for breaking news. I think this is a really bad habit, because Google News knows exactly what I want, and it generates an algorithm, guides me to find more news and information that I might want. And so I'm in this confirmation bubble all the time. And I'm basically, I'm kind of my own worst news consumer enemy in some ways. And the statistics are overwhelming. TikTok is downloaded more than any other app. We send nearly 13 million texts per minute. We watch over 4 million videos on YouTube per minute and generate more than 4 million likes on Facebook. This is not just an hour per hour or per day. These statistics are for every global minute. And 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years alone. Our current output of data is roughly 2.5 quintillion bytes a day. That sounds like a massive number, and it is. Yeah, so we live in a media saturated world where media and information consumption is not only just a habit for people, it's almost impossible to avoid. Most of us spend our time, our waking hours staring at screens. So many of our jobs depend on working online and with computers. And also with school, and especially when everything went to Zoom during the pandemic, students were really forced to use online platforms a lot more than they had in the past. And so in the COVID era, I think a lot of schools have become a little bit more reliant on digital platforms. I can personally attest to the fact that my teenagers spend at least 9 hours per day with media. My 14-year-old probably spends 18 hours a day. Currently, she's at home between middle school and high school, and I wish she didn't spend so much time on her phone. But there's so many things on there. You watch videos and television. It's where you get your social media. It's a huge issue with the advent of smartphones and with newer and faster apps, which will only get more complex. So let me turn it over to Kathy here. She's got some slides.
Okay, so what Seth has described is a far cry from the media scene I entered, just a few short decades ago. That is me at the very beginning of my newspaper career, dictating a story on a, remember payphones? So I have spent a career adapting to digital technology, and I do have some ideas for making sure that it works for you and not the other way around. Want to do that? Thank you. So when I think of news literacy or media literacy, whatever you want to call it, academics have these distinctions that I'm not really an academic, so I think it's all pretty much the same. But I'm reminded of this series of books that some of you may be aware of. They were created by the O'Reilly Publishing House, which does a lot of tech books. And O'Reilly calls them the missing manuals. And there's one for just about every kind of software or hardware that you can think of. And they're great. And the tagline, I don't know if you can read it there, but it is the book that should have been in the box, right? And we all have been there, right? But this is media literacy is the missing manual for the internet. It's the book that should have been in the black box. So the need for this manual never could have been anticipated by this guy. He is the guy who invented the internet. And no, it was not Al Gore, which is a joke my students don't understand, but this audience will. This is Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee is a British scientist who at the time was working at a Swiss research lab. And what Tim Berners-Lee wanted to do was find a way for scientists to share data that up till that time was locked into their personal computers. Remember that? When you actually had to pick up the computer and share it. And so in 1989, he drafted a plan to network computers. And his bosses called this plan vague but exciting. That may go down as the understatement of the millennium, because 2 years later, Berners-Lee's employer, the European Center for Nuclear Research, unveiled the World Wide Web to the public. Yes, sir. DARPA, yeah, Mosaic. Mhm.
We would get these 24 to 36 hour runs on two, and the data would be on gigantic things like this. And we would have contracts with people like that. Their scientists are supposed to help us analyze. And you couldn't make it because the stuff was so high classified. That system we had, which sounds just like what you were describing, was so we could send that kind of thing over a dedicated line. Nobody who wasn't part of that could access. It was closed. It was not open. It was closed.
Right, but then you can see, so what happened is when Berners-Lee, well, obviously there were other scientists who had interest in sharing information, and you can see the advantage of doing that. People working all over the world in different time zones. And what Berners-Lee, building on the back of exactly that system you're talking about, invented was something that was more public. And of course, for Berners-Lee, this was all about science. He was a computer engineer trying to help scientists do their work. But as we can see, people take technology, hello world, and use it for a whole lot of things that Berners-Lee probably never even could have imagined. Yeah, so here's the thing about technology. Can you click one ahead for me, Seth? It's like a remote control. You have to point it in the right direction. I think you might have to point it that way. There you go. Okay, so technology. Technology is a double-edged thing, right? You can use a gun to get dinner and build a sense of accomplishment like this young man in the picture, or if you'll click that for me, I think you point it this way. Here, let me try it. Oh, sorry. We're obviously not tech people. Or you can use it to kill somebody and create a tragedy, okay? Similarly, you can use nuclear power, to the power of the atom to heat and light a city, or you can blow one up. Or you can use TNT, explosives, to blow a hole in a mountain and make it a whole lot easier and safer to get from point A to point B. This is the Eisenhower Tunnel in the Rocky Mountains. And I think we can all agree that we'd rather go through than up and down that mountain. Or, hello, or, oops, you can use explosives to blow up a building, as happened in Oklahoma City in 1985, and kill a whole lot of people, including kids at a daycare. Or it is the same thing with the internet. We can use it to broaden our horizons and, to borrow a phrase, go places we've never dreamed of going before. Or we can use it to cocoon ourselves in ways that really aren't healthy. And Seth alluded to that a minute ago. So here is a key thing to understand about the digital rabbit holes we are all falling down. Most of those tunnels, unlike the Eisenhower one we were just looking at, were not built by professionals. Oops, it's going crazy on me here. You may feel like there's a lot more media in your life than ever before, and there is. But less and less of it is being produced by professional reporters and editors. And you can see on this slide what I'm talking about. Just look at the first column. You can see that there were over 114,000 professionals employed in newsrooms in 2008. And by 2020, we were down to 84,000. And it's gotten worse since then. So why do we see this precipitous drop? It is because the digital technology that we're talking about has broken the revenue model that for most of my career, or for all of my career, funded public interest journalism. You, the reader, never really paid for what it cost to produce the Daily Miracle, as those of us who sweated every deadline like to call the newspaper. Our work and your reading pleasure was subsidized by advertisers, and not just the ones who bought full-page ads for Dillard's or your local car dealership. Oops. No, I am talking about these ads. This was the real moneymaker. Classified ads, those tiny print solicitations for jobs, used cars, lost dogs, or that exercise bike you'd like to unload. Where do you go looking for this now? Right, not the newspaper. So, what's the problem? By now, I bet there are some people in this audience who are secretly thinking that I'm some grumpy old killjoy of a newspaper fogey who's trying to get you to go back to reading your news like your grandparents did. I mean, who wouldn't rather get their news on a smartphone? It's incredibly convenient and it's free, isn't it? So wait, we all know this, right? I don't know if Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman coined this phrase, but he did write a book with the title, "There's No Such Thing as a Free Lunch." And if you know that lunch isn't free, what makes you think news is free? Understanding how you're paying is the key to becoming a smarter news consumer. So what I want to talk about is why digital media is different from media of yore, from legacy media. And the first big difference is you are the product. What do we mean by that? This is and these slides will be made available to you and they are hot linked. So this is actually a hot link to Netflix. And if you are a subscriber, you can read more about this movie. This is a screenshot from The Great Hack. The Great Hack is a 2019 documentary, and it describes in pretty easy to follow terms how the data trails that we leave behind with every credit card swipe, every website visit, every Facebook like or Instagram post, and how that data can be used by marketers, or in the case of this movie, politicians, to predict and even change our behavior. One of the central characters in the movie utters this arresting quote: "Data is the most valuable asset on earth." Now, I don't know, there can be plenty of debate about the veracity of that. Is data really more valuable than oil? But there is no doubt that there's a lot of money to be made in trading data, your data. This is also a hot link. Axiom is one of the companies that pioneered data mining. It's from Arkansas. And when it sold a branch, just a branch of its business a couple of years ago, that branch sold for $2.3 billion, B as in boy. And this slide hot links to a New York Times article. It's a couple years old, but it's a great description of how Axiom does its job and how companies like this, which is now, this is a huge business, data mining. And this explains how it works. And it's important to know this, because this would be okay, maybe, if it just targeted you for advertising. You know, I like to knit. I really don't mind if knitting ads show up in my Facebook feed or whatever. But the problem is this, and this is what Seth alluded to earlier when he talked about Google News. Increasingly, we are finding that internet platform providers use our data to feed us information that keeps us on their sites. It turns out that the same data that allows marketers to know what you like and where you shop and what you read and what you watch enables internet providers to shield you from content that might be a turnoff and might make you leave their sites. And it allows them to offer alternatives that you might find more appealing, maybe even addictive. Internet providers want you to stay on their sites. It's not sinister, it's good old capitalism. That's how they make money. But the question is, are they using the same behavioral tracking techniques that serve up effective advertising to curate other types of information that you seek online? How likely are Facebook or Google to serve you up news that makes you uncomfortable? Trying to find the answer to that question is what led Eli Pariser to deliver a famous 2011 TED Talk. And that is linked also here on this slide. It's 11 minutes long, so you can watch it at home. Now, Pariser is a name some of you might remember because he was the founder of MoveOn.org. That was the internet movement that started out opposing then President Bill Clinton's impeachment. Oh, maybe you remember it. I remember it because I was a New York Daily News correspondent back then, the White House correspondent, and I never got home for dinner. But Eli was a liberal. He was defending Bubba. But Eli has lots of friends, like a lot of political activists, on the other side of the spectrum. And he likes to debate them online. And one day, Eli found out that a lot of them were disappearing from his Facebook feed. Finding out why is what led him to write the speech that I linked in the earlier slide, and then a book by the same title called The Filter Bubble. What this term describes is our own ability to use the internet to zero in on information we want, and more importantly, the internet's ability, thanks to big data and artificial intelligence, which my colleague Scott Christensen will tell you more about, the internet's ability to use that to enhance that effect, the effect of confirmation bias. And it's often without our even being conscious of it. And that is, they use algorithms to give you what you want, to give us news about causes, people, and events that we're already inclined towards because of our likes and our habits. And social media uses that to herd us into tribes and leave the middle ground unoccupied. Social media platforms want you to keep clicking and sharing. They promote virality. That means, as Sasha Havlicek of the Institute for Strategic Dialogue describes it, social media is hyperpartisan in an apartisan way. It doesn't care which extreme you favor. It just wants you to be extreme enough to keep audiences engaged. That's what gets posts boosted, not boring old nuance and compromise. Moderation is not clickbait. So there's another reason, and this is the second part of why digital media is different. There's another reason why social media, online platforms, not just social media, but online platforms can get away with this kind of outrage-provoking information. And that is, they do not have the same responsibility that legacy media outlets do. And that is the libel exemption. So you might remember you saw a picture of me phoning in a story on a payphone. Back in those days, when I was scrambling to find a payphone to call in my stories, you needed a lot of equipment and real estate to be a publisher. Printing presses, delivery trucks, big buildings to house equipment, and people. That meant a big investment. That's a lot to lose in a potential libel suit. So whether you think the media is a good thing or a bad thing, and believe me, I have the scars, I know what a lot of people think about the media. There is, for legacy media organizations, newspapers, television stations, broadcast radio, there is an actual financial incentive to be accurate. And there still is. Because if I write a letter to the Columbia Missourian falsely claiming that Seth here is a lying thief, the editor is not going to publish it. Why? Because the editor knows that Seth can sue, not just me, but the newspaper that publishes it. That is not true for internet providers. Why? Because back in 1996, lawmakers tacked a provision known as Section 230 onto the Telecommunications Act. Section 230 provides a broad exemption for internet providers from standard libel laws. Now, this was all very well intended because it may be hard to remember now, but most of us should remember back in the day. In 1996, a lot of what are now internet behemoths were garage bands. Like pretty much literally, Google grew up in a garage. And remember that we're talking about 1996, the internet wasn't even born until earlier that decade. And in 1991, in 1996, Yahoo had just been founded. Google wouldn't appear till 2 years later. They were still working in a garage. And Facebook wouldn't be founded in 1996. Mark Zuckerberg was 12 years old. Okay, the founder of Facebook, it would be 8 years until he created Facebook in his Harvard dorm. So this was these were very early days of the internet, and the internet was showing promise, and Congress wanted to protect this fledgling new organization and this communications tool, and thought, you know, if we make them hire libel lawyers and get libel insurance like those big dogs do in the media, we'll kill the baby in the cradle. And so probably then it was a really good idea. But we know the road to perdition is paved with good intentions, and this has had some pretty terrible consequences. So there is no incentive for an internet provider right now to police their backyards. There's a lot of debate over what to do about this. There are a lot of people who are legal experts, who are smarter than me, who think getting rid of Section 230 would be a terrible thing. And I will just say to you that I think this debate over how to regulate false speech without censoring political speech is going to be a huge public policy debate. I tell my students this is going to be one of the debates for their generation. It will dominate public policy debates for some time to come. So we're not going to resolve this question right away, but in the meantime, there are plenty of ways that we as news consumers can protect ourselves from getting played. And so I want to give you a couple ideas for how to do that, and I'm going to use some examples right up from our own state. So the first one comes from Cape Girardeau, and it involves the target of this attack was an institution that does an awful lot of good in most communities, United Way. So what happened here? This might be a little hard to read, but it is a column by John Rust. John Rust is the publisher of the Southeast Missourian newspaper. And Rust wrote this column, and what you're seeing here is a screenshot of a Facebook page that has since been taken down. So that's why I wanted to put that up there so you can see what that is. Now, the purported person behind this page, and I put that in scare quotes because you never know in the era of bot farms, was this really a person or not? This person was named Rachel Steenberg. And prominently displayed on Rachel's page was extremely racist language that the publisher of the paper has deleted here, but I'll leave that to your imagination, about George Floyd. And George Floyd was the Black man who was killed by police in Minneapolis and set off the Black Lives Matter movement. So in addition to racist language, and this was the hidden hand grenade on this page, the page's bio section listed all of Rachel's supposed biographical details, including connections to a host of actual Missouri institutions, including the Southeast Missouri United Way, which the page said Rachel was an employee of. Not true. But it took many, many weeks before the United Way of Southeast Missouri could stop the angry calls, the Facebook postings, the people saying, I'm never going to give to your organization again. And I want you to think about how much good the United Way does in communities around this state. And the idea was this could have stopped all of that from happening. Now, the good news is I checked with Elizabeth Shelton. She's the executive director of the Southeast Missouri United Way a few months after this happened. And she said things turned out okay for her organization. They were quickly able to counter the bad information, and they even ended up with a few new donors, sympathy money. But Shelton was able to do that because she had been trained in journalism and mass communications, and she knew how to respond aggressively, but with a level head on social and traditional media. And she got a big help when John Rust, the local newspaper publisher, wrote a column defending her organization and exposing how the venerable charity had been victimized. Okay. Another example, this happened right here in Columbia, right on our campus at Mizzou. And this was during the Black Lives Matter protests, or actually Ferguson. It was earlier than that. It was after Ferguson. So there were protests on our campus, as there were around the country. And during the protests, emotions are running pretty high. And this tweet appeared. Now, you will notice that I have not actually linked to the tweet because I'm not going to give traction to that kind of garbage, okay? But I've put the transcript there, and you can see the tweeter was at FanFan1911, and it said, the cops are marching with the KKK. They beat up my little brother, hashtag pray for Mizzou. This was an actual hashtag that the protesters were using, so that was pretty clever because it got it in the stream, so protesters were seeing it. And as you can see, a very disturbing picture with it. Now, as it happened, Air Force Colonel Jared Pryor, a 2003 Mizzou grad, was working on a master's degree thesis, not at Mizzou, at another institution, and he was working, it was a correspondence type thing. And his thesis was about social media and how it could be hijacked. And as a Mizzou alum, he was monitoring the situation here in Columbia because he cared about Mizzou. And he got curious. He was watching the tweets, and he was the one who figured out that that tweet was produced and amplified by a Russian disinformation factory. Hey, if you can't beat America militarily, you can see if you can get Americans to beat themselves by pitting them against each other, sowing mistrust and dissension. So imagine what would have happened if somebody seeing this very disturbing picture had acted on it. You know, it could have ruined a cop's life, it could have ruined a student's life, all kinds of things could have happened. But because the Russian bot farms were tweeting this, it trended on Twitter, and so actual demonstrators were retweeting it to each other. So you could have gotten this from a trusted friend and thought it was true. So I'm giving you this slide. This is actually a link to a little YouTube video that was produced by a professor from Webster University, Julie Smith, who does a lot of work on news literacy. She's a great colleague. And one of my former Mizzou colleagues who now works for a TV station in Arizona. And it's a YouTube video about how bot farms work. And I'm not going to play it, but you can play it at home. It's kind of an interesting little anatomy of. But the point is, what happened here is that the photo was real. You know, that was a very disturbing photo that was designed to make somebody want to throw something at a cop, right? And it was a real photo. But you do not have to be an Air Force colonel like Jared Pryor with access to special information to figure out that this is fake. Because what Pryor did immediately was a reverse image search, which I'm going to give you instructions on how to do in this slideshow. And as you can see, it was a real photo, but it was taken in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. And it was, I don't know if you can read that small print, but it was 2 years before the Missouri March. And of course, this happened about 1,000 miles away. So this is a pretty typical kind of thing that happens. You get, I'm going to go ahead if you don't mind, just so we get through our slides. And then this is a pretty typical thing that happens when you're with what we call photography, recycled images, and also some, you can, you know, to make it look like something that happened years ago happened now. I'm not going to go through the details of this, but this slide gives you 3 different options for how to use a reverse image search, and you can do this work yourself. There's also the Amnesty International, which does a lot of work in conflict zones, has a tool which we can send you the link to that, that will allow you to search YouTube videos as well and find out when they were made. So now what? You know, what are we going to do? Turn off the internet? No, I don't think so. We don't want to do that. We don't want to censor. So I'm going to turn it over to a librarian for some tips on how to handle all of this information.
Thanks, Kathy. So this, click to the next slide here. So as librarians, like journalists, we're here to assist the larger community in finding a way to navigate this really confusing and difficult media landscape. So I was at a training a couple of weeks ago, and one of the people who was presenting said, the best way to express what this time is confusing. And I would say, confusing is a great descriptor of what we're going through right now. At worst, it feels like the political divide is caused primarily by our inability to navigate this new digital world. But we do have some tips to assist you on this journey as librarians. And this is actually this is from a great poster. It's by the International Federation for Library Associations, I think, put this poster together. And it's also something, if you want to email me, I can actually share the poster with you. It does have the heading fake news, which we're trying to get away from using. But it's a great poster anyway. So consider the source. First, click away from the story to investigate the site, its mission, and its contact info. Kathy will actually discuss more tools on doing this as well. So this is actually from the Borowitz report. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that in the New Yorker. So it's a satirical news page. The New Yorker magazine appears regularly in the New Yorker. This particular story is about Elon Musk. And it actually denotes that it's satire in the about page on the top left-hand side. But the only real way to find out about it is you actually have to do a little bit digging around and figure out who the author is. It basically states that Andy Borowitz writes a satirical column, but if you just passed, this passed through your news feed and you just took a look at it and you could actually take it as fact. I actually have done that before with Borowitz's report because things are so strange right now. I do have to admit that he's tricked me a couple times. Read beyond. Headlines can be outrageous in an effort to get clicks. So this is actually a headline from the terrifying Ebola outbreak in 2014. But basically it was kind of a misleading ploy to draw readers into the site. 3 paragraphs down, you can read that the scientists say that the chances are relatively small that Ebola will make the jump to a respiratory virus. And so this type of hemorrhagic fever does not involve respiratory viruses in general. And Ebola itself is not that type of virus, but it was really kind of trying to bring people in. One of the things that I noticed a lot during COVID, that there were a lot of headlines like this, that even though it was a terrible illness and people were dying, it was an attempt to get people hooked into the headlines and reading beyond. Clickbait, everybody's familiar with clickbait. It's another way to draw readers in. This is an example of what it looks like. We see it all the time at the bottom of web page, especially from even from newspapers. The Columbia Tribune uses clickbait all the time as advertising. It's something that will lead you often to nefarious websites or websites that actually is asking for your money. A lot of viral content and misleading information. It's usually always found at the very bottom of the web page, but it can be very misleading. So this is actually from a recent Tribune page, and it's actually clickbait can also be couched as contests. Exactly. You can win $100,000 if you click on this and enter this contest. So it's confusing, and it's actually kind of serious journalism. I think it does kind of take away some of the seriousness of a story if you see it at the bottom of your page. So also check the author. Do a quick search on the author. Are they credible? Are they real? So we're going to use this example of the endangered Pacific Northwest tree octopus. So this particular website has been around for several years, and it's a great example of a satirical website that looks real. It's got FAQs, an activities page, in addition to an about page. The about page is always the best place to click and check if the author is legit. And as you can see from this particular about page, which says, this site is not associated with any school or educational organization other than the Kelvinic University branch of the Wild Haggis Conservation Society. So something was afoot with that for sure. So Lyle Zapato's author site, he's the person who, I don't know if it's a fictitious name, but he's the person who put this together. He says, I've been serving the paranoid since 1997, and he's pleased to offer a wide selection of amazing discoveries. So it must be noted, this site has been actually used for media literacy purposes extensively. In an October 2024 edition, or I guess it's not October 2024. This was October 2023 edition of the Journal of Information and Literacy Studies. It was noted that when it was used as a test case for media literacy in the Netherlands, only 2 out of 27 children, which was 7%, recognized the website as a hoax. Results that are even worse than those of a 2007 US study, where the website was recognized as being unreliable by slightly more than 6 out of 53 school children, which was 11%. So on a personal level, my 14-year-old daughter a couple of days ago is now fascinated by conspiracy theory sites and told me that she thought the moon landing was fake. So that was a terrifying moment for me as a parent. And I did talk to her a little bit about how it is actually real, but these things happen, and she's going down a rabbit hole apparently as she spends spends time by herself with the internet. So also opinion pieces can also be confused for truth or fact. This piece is in the Guardian newspaper, saying this, the Saudi regime murdered my fiance and I can't be allowed to buy Newcastle United. It's clearly listed as an opinion piece. However, opinion pieces are constantly being shared on social media as fact because some of the format of social media, you know, it's extreme. There's a lot of clickbait headlines and things like that. So it's really easy to share these things as fact or reporting, unless it's explicitly listed as an opinion page. As this piece, yeah, actually, there's some more information I want to tell you about this particular article as well as we'll get further down here. Supporting sources. Supporting sources help make reporting legitimate, especially if it's peer reviewed. Peer review is a great way to assess the quality of a manuscript before it's published. Independent researchers in the relevant research area assess submitted manuscripts for originality, validity, and significance to help editors determine whether a manuscript should be published in a journal. And peer review most often offers a deeper analysis with scientific rigor to research and articles in science and the social sciences as well. Yeah, so check the date. So we're going to go back to that Guardian article, and it was this opinion piece. The Guardian is doing great work in flagging articles as being a certain age. This article was published in May of 2020, is now 4 years old. Reposting old news stories is a very common mistake. I've done it. It's something that I think it's a great way to feel like you're very knowledgeable about a particular subject that has historically been in the past, so that people make the mistake posting it on social media all the time. And Kathy was also discussed some of how these repurposed articles and pieces of information in some of her previous slides can really muddy the information waters even further. Also, it is a joke, like we were talking about the Borowitz report. If it's too outlandish or if it's satire, research the site and the author to be sure. So here we go with the Onion. Again, the Onion is also a place where I felt like sometimes news was where basically a lot of things happen right now that seems like they should appear in the Onion. I'm just putting it that. But anyway, the article is reposted as a fact on social media, and then someone went nuts and said, this is why SeaWorld should go. But the internet is full with satire sites these days, are often really difficult to parse between reality and the satire sites. And they blur the lines intentionally. This is something that a lot of sites will do intentionally as well. And here's another example. Sometimes satire can be used in more nefarious ways. Which time cover is fake and which is real. It's kind of easy to tell, actually, but the one on the right is fake and it's been photoshopped. But this was spread online through social media. Also check your biases. Like I mentioned before, I'm in my own filter bubble because of Google News. Consider if your beliefs could affect your judgment. We all live in our own filter bubbles, and getting out of these bubbles is always a good idea once in a while. Yeah, so confirmation bias is the tendency people have toward embracing information that supports their beliefs and rejecting information that contradicts them. This is the same type of bias that runs the filter bubble algorithms on Facebook and other social media sites that we've spoken of before. So the headline you most want to believe or feels the truest to you is usually the one that you should take some time to verify and think, yeah, well, maybe is this really what I think it is? Okay, and let me switch over to Kathy here.
Because here's my way of describing the confirmation bias. We have a pogo problem. And some of you may remember little Pogo from the funny pages. And I love this slide because it really describes to me what confirmation bias is, and even professional media people can fall prey to it. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of this. This is a story that ran in the New York Post, owned by Rupert Murdoch, a well-known conservative, and this ran at the height of protests over Black Lives Matter. And these were protests. This particular story was about a protest in Portland, Oregon. Please note at the top of the page, the social media buttons that make this outrage-provoking headline and photo oh so easy to share. So needless to say, this news went viral. In the information churn, one Bible became stacks. And top Republican figures, including Senator Ted Cruz and Donald Trump Jr., the then president's son, spread the tweet. Because if you're on the right and you're sick of all this political correctness, you really, really want to believe that protesters on the other side are the most politically incorrect of all. But there's a problem. Yes, one Bible was burned, but not the stacks described on Twitter. And some of the Black Lives Matters protesters used their own water bottles and feet to put the fire out. And that was actually in this story, but it was way down at the bottom. You had to read the whole story to get to that. And what we now know is that the source of the video that got all the social media outrage going is a news agency backed by our friends in Russia. And that Russian tweets helped give the video its first traction. So again, if you can't beat us militarily, see if you can get us to beat each other. It happens on the other side too. You might remember this story, people on the left, the National Public Radio, which we all love, they leaped on this story about a confrontation on the National Capitol Mall between some young Trump supporters and Native Americans. Because if you're on the left, you really, really want to believe that these MAGA hat wearing kids, white boys, are going to disrespect a Native American elder. Well, as you may remember, that story turned out to be a lot more complicated, and many media organizations had to walk back their original stories. This gets to some of the slides that Seth showed, where even media sources fall prey to clickbait. Why? Well, there was a guy named Walter Williams who founded the Missouri School of Journalism, who wrote about this in the Journalist Creed, which was the very first media ethics code ever written right here. And one of the things that Walter says in that code is bribery by one's own pocket is as much to be avoided as bribery by the pocketbook of another. So what does that mean? It means don't pander to your audience just to make sure you keep them. You have to report what you know, whether your readers, viewers, and listeners are going to like that or not. Fox News could have saved itself a lot of money in a recent libel suit if it had kept that in mind. So, newsrooms are at their best when they operate by the old adage of the Chicago City News Bureau, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. That's what Seth was talking about when he says, check your confirmation bias. It's not that we don't trust dear old mom, but it's the things we most want to believe that are the things we should be most skeptical of, that we have to ask, is this really true? And so how do reporters do this? Well, I really like this slogan that Ronald Reagan used to make famous when he was negotiating with the then Soviet Union, trust but verify. So we try to find, we read laterally, we go out and we check our sources, we go out and try to find other information. And you don't have to be a professional reporter to do this. You read laterally, as Seth said. here are some, and these are all linked. These are some great fact-checking organizations that reporters use that are available to the public. If you see something crazy on the internet, chances are they've already checked it out. So I highly recommend all of these. But look and see, are other people reporting this story? Because if they're not, I'd start to be suspicious. Another thing is the story linked to a website, right? If it's not, I'd be suspicious. Does the website have an about page? If not, I'd be suspicious. Or can you find out who's behind this site? And the Missouri School of Journalism's newspaper, the Columbia Missourian, has a great website. It tells you, the About Us page tells you about our history. It tells you about our philosophy. It even tells you who's funding us. And most important, it includes a link to our staff page where you can find email addresses and phone numbers. So you can talk to actual people if you have a question or a complaint. And that brings me to the last hallmark of a legitimate news source. And this might sound really counterintuitive. Do you have corrections? Because guess what? To err is human. We really try hard not to make mistakes, but we will make mistakes because we are human beings. To correct is professional. And if somebody has corrections, it tells me as a news professional, they care about their reputation. They care about the reputations of the people they cover. That's a news source that's in it for the long haul, not some fly-by-night clickbait operation. Another tool I want to tell you about is whois.com. Whois.com is kind of like the white pages of the internet. It's operated by ICANN. What does ICANN stand for? Internet. Okay, there you go. Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers, and whois.com can tell you who's behind the web page. So let's take a quick look. Reliable News Now. Now, I don't know, that's kind of like saying I'm not a crook. If I say reliable news, I automatically wonder, is it really reliable? So the first thing I would say about this page is if you click on those links, this has obviously been refreshed since then, but some of the stories are from established sources, well-known news sites. Some of them are not, but here's one tell, there's no original content. Like nothing that comes from a reliable news source reporter, okay? So I start to wonder, you're not producing any of your own content. What's this all about? There don't seem to be any reporters working for this site. So, but I put the URL into whois.org or whois.com, and I get back this, that you will get this if you look carefully at this, you'll see a lot of deleted, not available, blah, blah, blah. The only address is for an outfit that does nothing but register. It's an internet registry outfit. So that's like me putting my lawyer's name on the corporation registry. It doesn't tell you who's behind the site. So if you want to do this yourself, just make sure you go to the right window. If you go to that main window and whois.com, you'll just get advertisements for like, here's a domain you can register. But if you go up to that top window and put the URL in there, you will get these results. And just by way of contrast, I want to show you what a legitimate organization's Whois page looks like. And this is the Columbia Missourian, and you can see that it gives not one, but several phone numbers. It gives an actual street address. In other words, again, another way that you can reach actual human beings if you have a complaint. That to me is the hallmark of a reliable news source. So we've given you a lot of information, and it probably seems like, oh God, I'm not a reporter. I can't do that. But we can do it. We have to do it because our democracy is at stake. And we've always come together to protect it before. This is from World War II, one of my favorite Americans, Rosie the Riveter. And I'm confident we can do it because I'm old enough, Seth's not quite old enough, to remember when nobody wore seatbelts and everybody smoked and people thought 3 martinis and a side of cholesterol was the lunch of champions, okay? Yep, there you go. It's not. But that all changed. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, steady progress of public education. And that's what we're here to do now. Okay, so if you are getting your information solely from social media or even just online providers that you are not self-selecting to get out of that filter bubble, this is what your information diet looks like. It's the equivalent of Doritos, Skittles, and Hostess Ho-Hos for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I mean, I like Doritos and Skittles and Hostess Ho-Hos, but I think we all know that if we do nothing but eat that breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we're not going to feel very good or look very good, okay? And so what I'm asking all of us here to do, and Seth is asking all of us to do, is to help ourselves and our fellow citizens develop a more sophisticated information palette. We've done that. And for real food, let's do it for our head food now. And we're giving you, as you leave, a few exercises that you can do to test out some of the theories that we've given you today about filter bubble. Here's one you can try at home with your friends, like try doing the same Google search. Try even seeing what ads you get when you go onto YouTube or to Facebook, and check with somebody who's a little different from you and see if there's a difference. And I would be interested to know, but I think you're going to find a big difference in what you're seeing online. And then here's a fun one for some of the things that Seth and I have talked about. First Draft News will show you how news outlets actually check the social media information we get to see. We use a lot of sophisticated techniques. You don't have to do this, but know that legitimate organizations use this to verify information we get over social media. And then the last one is a really fun thing that you can, again, try it with your grandchildren. You know, it's kind of a fun thing to do. But which face is real? And it is a University of Washington site that shows you a little bit about how easy it is to fake information and fake the visual information, and gives you some of the ways to, there are some little tells you can use to spot the fakes. Also, the University of Washington talks a little bit about how to protect yourself against the deep fakes created by AI. But that is something that my colleague Scott, sitting right here, Scott Christensen, will talk about in the third of this series when he talks about AI. And before that, you'll have Seth 2 weeks from now doing a healthy digital habits workshop on the 26th. So same time, same place. And don't be strangers. We're going to give you some time to ask us questions now, but we are available all the time. I think both Seth and I are really dedicated to this cause, and we are both public servants. So we are here to help you after you leave as well as here. So I'm going to open it up for questions right now. Yeah, thank you. Questions? Thank you.
You were talking about the Russian operation, the fake news Russian, not fake news, but the Russian.
Hot farms, yeah.
I went on leave in Rome in 1978, and we had already been told about what the Russians were doing in Europe in the 70s. And they didn't have social media, or they didn't have the internet, but they had newspapers and radio stations. They were doing the same thing. And the reason I'm sensitive to it is because I went down there, drove my car, brand new app. Market, supposed to market. Back. Came back, through my hotel, and there was my Audi crash, no end. By right, that these guys got started because of some stuff they said about the Pope that people believe, and I didn't believe anybody in Italy would believe bad things about the Pope. So this is not something new for the what I call the graduate or the present day Soviets. This has been going on for at least 75 years, and they're pretty good at it. But
Yeah, well, and I think the other difference is it's so much easier. It's like disinformation on steroids when, because it's so much easier to spread it on social media. So, yeah, but you're right. It's old tactics, but they're turbocharged now.
well, yeah, they got better tools.
Exactly.
I'm curious about the headline writers. Because I see shocking headlines and it just infuriates me.
Yeah, well, Seth had a good example of that in the slides with the headline about the Ebola virus that made it seem like, wow, we could catch Ebola tomorrow. And that is a real problem. And I think, that is really what I was alluding to when I quoted Walter Williams as saying bribery by one's own pocket is as much to be avoided as bribery by another's. In other words, that is an irresponsible effort to build audience. And in the current day, when all those classified ads are gone, the temptation is much greater. It's not to say that it's illegitimate. We shouldn't fall prey to the temptation. And that's why something like the Journalist Creed, which is pretty amazing. It's amazing how it stood the test of time. But, this is something we as content providers have to keep reminding ourselves, something that we still teach at the Missouri School of Journalism, which is don't fall prey to that. Because in the end, it's not a smart thing to do because you may get a click today, but as soon as somebody reads further down in the story, as Seth showed you, and you see that, well, this is bull. This isn't, Ebola is not like COVID. It doesn't spread the same way. You're not going to go to that news source. Yeah, a lot of people, well, and again, part of what we do, we want to get people reading, and there's a fine line between cute and too cute, and it's, I'm not going to defend it. It happens. I've probably been guilty of it in my day. People can point to it and say, wait a minute, that's pushing the envelope too far. But I think you're seeing more of it now because there was a time when we knew that people would be picking up our newspapers at the doorstep or watching our 6 o'clock news or listening to our 5:30 broadcast. And that whole model's been broken. So it's a lot. People are trying to get your attention. This is what is called an attention economy. And that's why we say you're the product. And so part of what you need to do, we need to be better. We need to be more professional as content providers, but we also have to survive, and so how do we square that circle? And part of the reason I'm here tonight is because I'm asking you, our audience, to please help us, help the people who are providing fact-based public interest journalism by clicking on our stuff and not the crazy stuff. And so, because we can see in the newsroom every minute of every day, I see one of my colleagues back here who's has worked in many professional newsrooms, and we can tell you, we can see a big screen and we know exactly how many people are reading any given story at any given time. And guess what? Some of the really serious stuff that we spend a lot of time reporting aren't getting those clicks. So you get what you click on. We need to educate our readers and our viewers and our listeners so that, You're part of, it's the pogo problem I talked about. We have met the enemy and it is us. We need to be responsible for the care and feeding of a good news ecosystem and not one that's just a lot of junk food.
We have a question online from one of our Zoom viewers, and they say, I struggle with where to get my news content. Any suggestions?
Well, you know, we are not, I would say, we're not here to tell you where to get your news. But I think some of the tips we've given are good ones. I mean, I would say look for, if you're looking online, look for websites that have about pages. Look for, but I would say also look offline as well. And don't be satisfied with what's served up to you. What's served up to you automatically is served by algorithms that are fed by the data mining companies that we talked about. And if you only do that, you're still in that filter bubble. You're only getting news for, by, and about, you know, people you're interested in. I was talking to one gentleman here who said, you know, he actually goes out and listens to news put out by outlets he disagrees with. And I do the same thing. I really try to vary my information diet so that I am getting all perspectives. As a reporter, it's a little easier for me because I'm paid to talk to everybody, right? And I find that very rewarding, and I often learn a lot. So I would say the same thing. Find a couple of sources that you rely on. The other thing I would say is read local, watch local. It's really important to know what's going on in your own community. And as Seth said earlier, you know, there are a lot of races. If you watch national news, you would think there was only one elected office in this country. And there's a lot more going on. And by the way, if you vote for one person for president, whomever you vote for, that person cannot change the direction of the country without a Congress, without courts, without state legislatures. And the people who have the most influence on you are going to be the most local officials, the mayor, the city council, the board of education. And you're only going to find out about those races in your local news outlet. So I'm going to make a plug for reading local. And they tend to be less politically polarized too. Based on that hum, I'm thinking there's a question in the back door. You were getting ready to ask.
You know, Seth, you said your daughter was online for what, 14 hours a day or 18 hours a day. Are people ultimately going to be just sick and tired of it? I mean, how much time can you spend looking at crap? Pardon me. After a while, yes, I mean, after a while, you know, we move along. You even said we had 3 martini lunches and everybody smoked. Now we're doing this. You know, nobody had phones that they carried in their pocket. Now everybody does, and everybody looks at all of this. Is there some point? I'll tell you, I'm done pretty much, and I only do one social media, so I can't even imagine. I just wonder if after a while, spending 14 hours a day on this.
Yeah,
What will
I
be
mean,
done?
and it's also, the internet is so new. You know, that's one of the things that that staggers me when I think about it. You know, when I was in college getting my undergrad in the early 1990s, and there was no, you know, there was no way to get on the internet. You just had to go through these databases, and it's so different for my children now. So I wonder if things will evolve. I mean, I think there's a reaction against some of this being permanently online. And I am going to talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of weeks, in 2 weeks from now. Basically, there are a lot of tools out there to help people with managing their digital time. And I just think it's really important, especially for the young generation. And I hope some educators and maybe some teens come to this healthy digital habits in 2 weeks. Maybe I can convince my daughter to come as well. But I think things are evolving. Yeah, right. Things are evolving in some positive ways regarding that, but I think you might have a.
I could just add, because I teach college students, and it's interesting. I do make my students put their devices down, and with the sophomores, it's very difficult. They're very resentful. They really can't, keep looking, and I have to say, you're addicted. But by the time they're seniors, I teach another class, and I actually have this basket that looks like it's from the Wizard of Oz, Toto could have written in it. And I make my students put their devices in the basket when we start the class. And the upperclassmen are kind of like, they actually accept it, they like it, because I think by that time they have realized how distracting it is. And the whole class is talking about the distraction of and how we manage to live in this world. And so I think as people move on and they find that there are things, I think the more juvenile people are, the more, it's like when you're a kid, you're interested in your peers, right? And you're interested in impressing your peers. And as you get a little more mature, it's like, maybe I have some things, some priorities of my own. And I think maybe all of us need to go through that. But it is interesting. I have students who actually are disengaging from social media, and they're maybe on one social media platform as opposed to multiples. And so I am seeing a little bit of pushback. It's probably too early to call it a trend, but it's interesting to watch. Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask
Yeah,
a
you-
question and then I'll hand you the microphone. Do you think that media literacy is being added to K through 12 curriculum? I mean, are we catching young people early on and introducing them to what you're telling us?
Well, I know the Columbia Public Schools is pushing a program out that they actually incubated. We incubated it with them at Reynolds Journalism Institute, and that's being pushed out, and that's a middle school program. I also know that there's a state representative from outside St. Louis, Jim Murphy. He's a Republican who represents a district outside of St. Louis, and he's introduced a bill over the last couple of legislatures to require media literacy, Illinois, to be taught in public schools. Illinois passed a law like that. It's a little bit controversial. I mean, if there are any teachers in the room, I know it's like, teachers feel like, oh, one more thing I have to add in. But a lot of the people who are developing this material are quite mindful of that. And there are certainly ways, I don't know, Seth, you might have some thoughts about this, that what we're really teaching is critical thinking. And that can certainly be adapted and woven into existing course content in our public schools. But I think there's definitely a move towards that. Did you want to add anything more about what you're doing at the library? Yeah.
So this is really what we're doing right now has been a centerpiece of our some of our summer programming, and we're gonna keep offering media and digital literacy type courses. What we have done also is we've integrated a lot of this digital and media literacy curriculum into our technology programs, which I think has been really helpful. We have something called Device Advice, which is a drop-in program. And so I'm one of the tech coordinators at the library, and we've really, I probably emphasized digital and media literacy a little bit too much to the tech trainers, but I'd like to say, if these ideas come up, if some of these questions come up, there are these different strategies that people can use. I also want to say, the Columbia Public Schools are really starting to do a great job with it. And even in private schools, my daughter was in the local Waldorf school last year as a middle schooler, and they've completely introduced a whole media literacy block in that as well too. So it's starting to trickle down. I don't know why. I'm a little bit confused why she's questioning the moon landing after going through a media literacy block at her school, but I don't know, we're trying, right? Exactly, right?
Quick question. Social media was supposed to make everybody more social, more friendly. What do you see in your classrooms or in the public library about the effect on social media as far as interpersonal relationships go?
Yeah, well, it's really hard. I mean, I think it's interesting because I teach journalism and our students are really want to be journalists there. That's why they come to the Missouri School of Journalism. And one of the biggest challenges that my students have is making a phone call. Because, and I talk to them about this and I say, you're not going to believe this, but when I was a little kid, if I wanted to find out if my friend Patty could come out and play, I'd have to go to the kitchen and climb up on a chair and reach way up. And there was this machine with a dial on it. And, and it was in the same place at the other house. So 9 times out of 10, the person picking up that phone was a tall person. And tall people have a lot of questions for small people. So if you think about it, those of us who are of a certain age, were really socialized from a very young age to talk to strangers, to interact with authority figures. And so we were very comfortable. It's easy to, when you learn something as a kid, it's easy, right? And now when I ask my students to make a phone call to somebody they don't know, it's like I'm trying to ask them to learn to roller skate when they're 25. There's a lot further to fall. So we really have to work with the texting generation to develop those skills. And I don't think we should be judgmental about it, because the story I tell about being a kid, it's like there were certain skills we acquired because we had to. Right. And there were skills they didn't acquire because they didn't have to. They look at us and say, how can you be such a dope about, whatever piece of software or hardware you can't work. Right. And so I think we just need to be a little more forgiving of each other and understand that how each of us grew up has had an impact on how we interact with the world. But I will say, to answer your question, I mean, my point is, what students will say to me is if I ask them, and probably some of you have heard this from your kids or grandkids, it's like if I ask them to call somebody, they'll say, oh, that's so awkward. Because it's a lot easier to text somebody you already know. And so, yeah, but this is the whole point. It's building bubbles of people you already know. And, for a while, like I talked to kids, things have changed, but initially, I'd say to kids, how are you getting news? And they would say, well, I get texts, links, text, or, email to me by friends. And I would say, well, you realize you're only getting news from people you already agree with. So we keep, what this technology has done, it was in one of the slides I showed you, the internet can broaden our horizons enormously. Or, but if I'm only using the internet to get news for by and about fellow yoga practitioners who were vegans and knit, and you can do that. You can really bore in. And the other thing I would say is when we read a newspaper, like the old fashioned way, or watch a newscast that somebody else put together, that is serendipitous information gathering, right? I turn the page, I don't know what's going to be on the next page, right? And I just happen to see a headline. I might not read the whole story, but I know there's a famine in Africa, right? Because I've seen the headline. I'm going to read it. It's unpleasant, but I know it's there. The internet is built for search. So I can go out and say, I want a news story I want to read only news stories about the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's all I want in my news feed, right? And I'm never going to find out about that Africa famine. So I think that's the other thing, to get back to the question of how do you pick your news sources? Are you giving yourself an opportunity? Because usually for me, the most interesting story is the one I didn't expect to find there. So we have to build that back into our information diet, and we have to think of ways to get around that tunnel vision that the internet can sometimes give us. It's a fantastic tool, and there are ways you can use it to broaden your horizon, but you need to be aware of how it can also create tunnel vision and counteract that.
Well, one more comment? Okay.
think we're done over the time.
Yeah, I want to be mindful of people's time. And I have a couple of quick, thank you very much for both of you being here tonight. I could listen to it for a lot longer than what we've got this evening. Come back in 2 weeks. Seth will be back with you talking about good social media habits. Bring your kids or grandkids if you'd like. We'd love to have them here. And then in 4 weeks, we'll visit with Scott Christensen and we'll hear hopefully a lot about artificial intelligence and how it's moving into our lives. Couple things, have a cookie on your way out. If you want some information about voter registration, we got some information out there on the table. The library has information. What else can I say? But thank you again.
Thank you to your public library for doing that. That's awesome. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.